English translation, 238th Contact. Part 2. Saturday, 18th of May, 1991. 00:55 hours.
Well, then maybe I could ask some more questions?
You are just as tireless as ever, but just ask.
Thanks. From Sim-Ya, say I know that not only Earth humans have alcoholic beverages, but also you, even if your brews are only similar to alcohol. What do you understand by the term alcohol-like, and how dangerous is alcohol for humans?
By alcohol-like products, we only mean products and beverages that have an alcohol taste but contain no alcohol, or only so little that the values are far below those that are usual on Earth for alcohol-free beer. The taste of our alcoholic beverages and products is the same as that of the alcoholic products common on the Earth. However, this is certainly not surprising when one considers that we use almost the same manufacturing processes for these alcohol-like products and beverages as are used on the Earth for the production of alcoholic beverages, only that our manufacturing processes and the necessary equipment are refined and much more advanced than those of Earth humans. It should also be noted that, during the production process of beverages and other products, all the acids that are responsible for fermentation or the production of alcohol are removed, either completely or down to a tiny residual amount from the start of production. In this way, both fermentation agents and other substances are thoroughly removed and the desired product is obtained. Of course, other measures are also needed, because it is not only a matter of removing bacteria and acids, but also of changing chemical structures, etc. With regard to the harmfulness of alcohol, it should be said that the earthly sciences and earthly medicine and psychiatry, etc. are very well aware of this. Also with regard to the fact that alcohol not only destroys material consciousness and the liver and kidneys, as well as the entire nervous system, but that it also has a carcinogenic effect, whereby the malignant and carcinogenic poison, urethane, should be mentioned first and foremost. This is in addition to the dangerous prussic acid, which occurs especially in stone and kernel fruit alcohols, but this does not mean that other alcoholic beverages do not also have certain proportions of this poison. The truth is, however, that the worst poison is urethane, because it increases and strengthens depending on how the alcohol contained in this poison is stored. Especially on Earth, it is unfortunately common practice that all alcoholic beverages are stored very improperly and not product appropriately, because in restaurants and department stores, in shops and private premises, as well as in alcohol production facilities, the alcoholic products are wrongly stored. That is to say, in light-permissible places or illuminated by artificial light. But this should not be the case, because any alcoholic product is light-sensitive and extremely light-reactive. The incidence of light causes chemical changes and transformations in alcoholic beverages, which become very dangerous for humans when they drink the alcoholic beverages exposed to light. The incidence of light changes and transforms many alcoholic poisons, and thus reaches values that are very dangerous for humans. This happens among other things with the poison urethane, which multiplies up to 38% in alcohol due to the incidence of light. For this reason alone, any kind of alcohol should never be exposed to light, except for the short period of time during which it is consumed by humans. However, this rule applies to the entire range of alcoholic products and beverages, that is to say, hard alcohol as well as all wines and sparkling wines.
Spirits, wines and champagne, etc. of all kinds?
Certainly.
But what about drinking a glass of wine or a hard liquor or just liqueur now and then?
If there is no exorbitancy and it remains with minimal daily or occasional small amounts, then the consumption of alcohol with these toxins is no longer important and therefore not harmful.
If I understand correctly, then minimal daily or occasional smaller amounts of alcohol do not harm. Despite the poison urethane and prussic acid and all other harmful substances, unless an exorbitancy takes place or the alcohol is enjoyed chronically.
That is the meaning of my words.
Then this is also clear. Furthermore, I would like to know something about a conversation I had with Simya-se years ago, during which she explained to me that organ transplants are contrary to creation in the manner that they are carried out by human beings on Earth. She also explained that if foreign organs were implanted into a human being, they would automatically be repelled by the body's defense system, which is why the defense system had to be constantly maltreated with immunosuppressive drugs in order not to repel the foreign body organ. She explained to me that this had to be continued until the end of life. For real organ transplants, she explained to me at that time, only the possibility could be considered that at the youngest age, a human being's cells, taken from him or her, would be grown into the necessary organs, which would then be transplanted to the person concerned if necessary. Therefore, the organs are practically the body's own organs, and also the same age as the human being who needs them. She also explained that foreign organs had foreign swinging waves, against which the body's defense system reacted in an acidic form, and always tried to repel the foreign organs. According to Simya-se, a foreign body organ in a human body always forms a foreign body that can never become the body's own. We have discussed this recently, and I have passed this information on to Simya-se as I understood it at that time. Was my explanation correct, or do I have to correct myself?
There is nothing wrong in your statement.
Well, then perhaps I was right with my assumption that the same can be done with the blood, and that one can even take the body's own blood from the body and detoxify it, and possibly graft it with the body's own antibodies, and thereby prepare it so that it acts on the sick body like a miracle drug when this treated blood is reintroduced into the body's bloodstream. I did not talk about it, because it is only a guess of mine, and on the other hand, if I was not right, they would use it against me. But in principle, my assumption would not have to be so far-fetched when I look at the system you use to produce transplants.
Your assumption corresponds to the facts, although I do not understand the connection of how you come from organ breeding to programming the body's own blood with the body's own defenses. I simply cannot follow your train of thought, and some other time I am amazed at your combination possibilities, which are inexplicable to me.
That is just my thinking. I do not want to talk about that now, however, but about something completely different. Once again, I have made some calculations and have come across the fact that certain official bodies in India have been dealing with the evil of dowry killings of wives for years. The point is that wives are simply insidiously or often officially murdered by their husbands when the dowry is wasted, squandered, or simply used up. In India, as in the case of the Greeks, who still cling to the conservative and thus to traditional and old customs and traditions, it is the case that, in the case of a marriage, the person capable of marriage only has a chance of actually finding a husband if she possesses a decent dowry that either originates from herself or has to be paid by her father or the family. So a person willing to marry cannot become a bride and wife without an appropriate dowry, if at least the groom and his family and relatives are conservative in whole or in part. Fortunately, however, this also changes in Greece, and thus with the Greeks themselves more and more to the modern, whereby this dowry custom disappears more and more. Fortunately, one has to say that the dowry of the bride becomes practically the personal property of the husband through the marriage, who generously and autocratically disposes of it and uses the dowry as he pleases, or simply squanders it or does business with it, etc. in India. This unworthy and discriminatory and contemptuous abuse of the dowry of women is particularly pronounced, because there, the husband's self-righteousness in relation to the throwing away of the wife's dowry and the inhuman disrespect and desecration of her knows no bounds. and even torture and murder are not balked at when the dowry has been used up. In India, for example, wives and their families and relatives are very often viciously blackmailed by their husbands in order to loosen up financial resources again and again. This often results in such blackmailed families or wives surrendering to prostitution, whereby even small children are often forced to fornicate in order to raise the necessary funds for the blackmailing husbands. If the wife or her family or relatives do not pay or can no longer pay, then the wife is usually killed by her husband without further ado, and all this is because the dowry of the wife was too low for the wastefulness and personal wishes of the husband. It can also be seen from this that Indian men do not usually marry out of love, but out of pure greed. This is completely in contrast to the men of other countries, who usually marry out of emotions, with exceptions, of course. When I think of the system of Islam, which requires the bridegroom to pay a certain security price for the bride, which is given to the bride and the wife personally, or to a faithful administrator for her, as a lifetime security, so that she can live on it at any time and never suffers need, then I find this regulation fantastically good, while the Indian system is downright satanically malicious and primitive and almost animates to murder. I have lived and worked in India for over a year, and I have experienced all sorts of things, from these murders and religious murders, mainly from the Kali sect, which strangles its victims with a knotted silk cord, to burning of widows and carving up of corpses for the ravens and vultures, etc., but I have never been able to find my way around these bestial and profit-seeking as well as wasteful dowry murders. Together with Quetzal, I once calculated an average of these murders for only 1 year. I arrived at a result of slightly more than 54,000, while Quetzal with his calculations was still more than 1,200 murders of this kind and higher per year. Now my question is whether this has changed in the meantime, and whether this kind of murder has decreased or increased. According to my calculations, these types of murders have increased in recent years, even if statistics mislead us into believing that less than 1/10 of our calculations would apply.
Your assumption and calculations apply very accurately, even if inadequate statistics claim otherwise. At the moment, there is another Indian statistical study taking place concerning these murders of wives, which should be finished at the beginning of September, after which new, but unfortunately again wrong results will be determined, which will certainly find their misleading passage into the world press.
Then it will be as you say. But now I would like to ask you something that has nothing to do with murder and manslaughter. I am interested in the climatic conditions and weather that will prevail in Switzerland this year.
This question really refers to harmlessness if I disregard the fact that some quite severe storms will hit various areas of Switzerland and cause major damage. On the whole, you will experience a very splendid and hot summer in your homeland, which I know you hold in high esteem. There will be a lot of sunshine, and you will enjoy it. You love the warmth, as I am also not unaware of. There is not much rain, because the air pollution of the burning oil wells in Kuwait and the gas, smoke and dirt particles of the mentioned volcanic eruptions Pinatubo and Unzendake, as well as some others, will cause enormous climate changes, which will already be noticeable this coming summer. Nevertheless, it is not possible to speak of an exceptionally hot summer, even if it is accompanied by high temperatures and drought, which will affect agriculture, especially in certain areas.
So it is a fairy tale summer, so to speak?
You can see it that way.
Good. But again, it will not be right for all people, because the eternal stinkers will also curse about sun and heat and dryness, as well as those for whom every drop of rain is too much. It is truly only good that the human beings on the earth are not yet able to influence the weather in such a manner that they are able to make snow or rain, storm and thunderstorm, or sunshine and heat at will. If that were so, then evil would come in persona running on stilts. One would make only vain sunshine and warmth for his dearest beloved, the rain fan only straight rain, the snow strollers all year round only snow and ice, and the one bad neighbor would send to the other only straight storm and hail, thunderstorm and climatic ruin over the garden or the fields, or produce such a cold that even all heating is useless, and the arch enemy freezes to death in the bed. But what do you think of that? As far as I know, you influence the climate and the weather only as far as it seems necessary or given for plants, animals, and humans. So, for example, that you regulate excessive cold or heat collapses, prevent hailstorms, contain dangerous storms, prevent rainfalls, which would bring floods and great damage, regulate and tame volcanoes, and more of the like. Is that right?
This corresponds to our customs. All the peoples of our federation are committed to respecting the laws of nature and to allowing natural climatic processes, etc., to run their course. We do not influence the weather in the form that we would design it according to our personal desires. We only intervene where there are threats to land, plants, and human and animal life, as you explained earlier. Your remarks are of correctness.
Also good. Then I remember at least in the right form. But now another question, which is actually related to what we talked about 15 minutes ago. Our topic was the organs for transplants and the body's own defense substances or defense bodies that repel foreign organs. These substances or bodies are products of the immune system, which ensures that the body and blood, etc., cannot be attacked by pathogens. However, the immune system is not always mobile in the same strong form. Consequently, it is more efficient and then less efficient again, whereby naturally also the body and the blood, etc., dependent on the immune system as well as all organs and the nerves, etc., are more or less subject to certain fluctuations in the susceptibility to disease. But I am not telling you anything new as a physician, although I would like to point out that you are just as well trained in this subject as Quetzal. But that is not the reason for my speech. It is connected with a question that you might want to answer. But only if you are allowed to do so. But this question is now the one. The immune system produces antipowers and antibodies, as I have already said. But what about the fact that these antibodies and antipowers could actually also be produced artificially or semi-artificially by humans? If nature can already carry out chemical reactions and physical changes, etc., then it is not only obvious to me, but it is a matter of course to me that humans can do exactly the same, if they are so advanced in their knowledge and with their developments in apparatus, mechanics, and computers that they have the possibilities to do so. Now for the main question, are the Earth human medical, chemical, and computer sciences, etc., already so far developed that they could develop or isolate such antibodies and anti-powers in order to produce special immune-strengthening drugs in prophylactic form, or even drugs that could be used as acute treatment drugs? If so, what is the name of such a drug in an acute treatable or prophylactic form, and from which substances could such drugs be derived?
You are thus addressing a topic on which we have been sending out instructive impulses to the world's leading scientists for some time, which is why I can also give you an official answer to this question. Certainly, the possibility of producing such drugs of a prophylactic and treatable nature is given. The name of such a medicine would first have to be invented by the manufacturers, whereas we simply call it Salubritason, which in German means simply remedy. The name is thus pronounced in such a way that the O is emphasized in a drawn-out manner, as you have just heard from me.
So Salubritasun, pronounced with two O's, so to speak.
That is correct. But keep listening. The actual active ingredient for a drug, as you mentioned it, in both forms, that is to say for acute treatment and prophylactic application, is already known to medical scientists around the world as gamma interferon. This substance, gamma interferon, must now only be isolated by the responsible specialists and separated from the corresponding products. which contain this high-quality defense substance against pathogens in order to then process it into a corresponding medicine, which can be administered to humans. The substance gamma interferon is a natural product of chemical transformation. For example, when milk is converted to yogurt or kefir, so it is only necessary that the gamma interferon is removed from the mentioned products and converted into a drug. Disease-prone human beings should take such a medication prophylactically daily in an appropriate amount, in addition to the necessary vitamins, trace elements, and minerals, whereby special care should also be taken with vitamin C that a daily unit requirement of at least 900 milligrams is required per adult human if he or she has a reasonably balanced and health-promoting vitamin C requirement and wants to be healthy. The 75 to 150 milligrams established in this respect by the earthly physicians unfortunately correspond to extremely erroneous assumptions, whereas your calculations are very realistic. If I compare your data made to me regarding the vitamin C as well as the other vitamins and trace elements and minerals which you take and also recommend.
So this gamma interferon is practically the same antidote or anti-substance against pathogens as it is produced by the human immune system itself.
Sort of, yes.
Then it also works similarly to the natural products in terms of antibodies and defenses of the human immune system?
This is so. The effect is even better if the drug is taken in larger, controlled, and appropriate amounts. It is able to prevent almost any disease and to nip it in the bud, even cancer of any kind, because when taken and used in appropriate quantities, it is able to destroy even the most persistent viruses, not to mention less resistant pathogens.
Then it is only to be hoped that the medical tinkerers and other clever ones will soon find the way and the means to produce this remedy and make it available to humankind.
This is also our wish, because this medicine alone could contain or prevent many and often painful evils on the earth.
Should the consumption of yogurt or kefir be the only benefit?
That is correct, but larger quantities must be enjoyed daily. An appropriately dosed medication would be more useful and less cumbersome.
Do you also use such drugs?
In extreme cases, yes, but otherwise we do not take it as an actual medicine, but as a preventive, that is to say, prophylactically, as a daily food supplement. Our coordination of the anti-substance is dosed and adjusted to the individual person in such a manner that no more diseases appear. The only evil to which we have not yet been able to come to terms with is the common cold, which we only succumb to when we are on the earth.
I already heard that once from Simyase. In her opinion, there's not much you can do about it.
My daughter was wrong about this. But this is understandable if you know that she does not yet have a complete medical education. But we who deal with medicine know that this is not the case. So we have also found out that even the common cold, which we only succumb to on the earth, can also be combated prophylactically and actively. As we have found out, humans need an increased supply of zinc and vitamin C and an increased intake of the substance salubritazone. In this respect, we are now in the process of clarifying the exact need for us, according to which we will then also be immune to the earthly cold, which should be the case in about 2 months. However, our knowledge in this regard should also be useful to the human being of Earth. If he or she is also able to protect themselves from the cold, if they supply themselves with larger quantities of the substances mentioned.
For my part, I have found that a little zinc and about 900 milligrams of vitamin C can protect me from the cold every day. Even if everyone has a cold all around, and I am attacked with their bacilli and viruses, etc. that have been blown out. This is about 150 milligrams more than my daily vitamin C ration. Sometimes, however, it is also necessary that I take more than 1 gram of vitamin C daily, depending on my physical and mental condition. If my psyche is damaged and demolished to a certain extent, then my immune system no longer functions fully, which means that I have to pump more defense substances in the form of vitamin C into myself. But that is enough, because I have other questions. During your long absence, a lot of questions arose, of which I would like to address at least some to you. In a video film, I saw a documentary about mutations of leeches, which have reached a gigantic size of about 50 centimeters due to radioactive or chemical influences, and which are so poisonous that human beings die when they are attacked and bitten by these critters. The aforementioned is an incident in America, where a young woman was bitten by such a leech and died within a short time as a result of the leech poison. Now for my question. Is it possible that such mutations due to chemical or radioactive influences are already occurring outside America? And what types of life forms are affected by them?
Mutations of the kind you mentioned are caused by the fact that various chemical liquids or gases enter water or soil or simply the atmosphere and are absorbed by various life forms, including human beings. Radioactive radiation of all kinds should also be mentioned in the same breath, as you have already mentioned. In many forms of life, such as humans, proliferating ulcers very often occur, which are called cancer. In the water area, fish are usually infested, while other species mutate into unshapely or gigantic beings due to the same dangerous radiation or toxic substances, such as the leeches or jellyfish you mentioned, which reach many times the original body size, which can be very dangerous not only for humans, but also for many other life forms. Even technical human equipment can be endangered, which will soon lead to the realization of horror films in which horrifying actions are depicted, in which angry or mutated animals attack and destroy humans, their settlements, and their technical equipment. Such a case will occur as early as August on a stretch of Scottish coast where jellyfish have already mutated into giant sizes as a result of radioactive radiation from nuclear power plants. Guided by their we form, they will try to switch off the cooling water system, which corresponds to a controlled action and not a coincidence, as the responsible ones claim. The jellyfish will also attack exactly that cooling water system of the nuclear power plant that is to blame for their mutation of the giant growth. On the other hand, such mutated life forms have already emerged around the globe in many waters as well as in and on the Earth.
Then one can slowly prepare oneself for all kinds of unpleasant things.
As a rule, those responsible conceal or trivialize such incidents and knowledge, as will be the case in Scotland in the case of the incident mentioned above. The general public or environmental organizations, etc., will not be informed, or only inadequately, or simply misleadingly.
That is the rule, I know. But now again another question. One that does not come directly from me, but from another source, which I would like to tell you openly, so you might answer it to me after all, and on the other hand, it also interests me personally. So may I ask the question?
In this case, yes.
Good. I do not know where to begin. Well, it is an energy question that actually concerns your past. Surely your early ancestors did their first spaceflight according to the same principle as is still common here on the Earth today, namely, with rocket engines, right? Here on Earth, scientists are already megalomaniacally talking about space travel and space travelers when they shoot their rockets onto the moon or into an Earth orbit. But is it now what I assume?
Your assumption is correct.
Very good. It would now be time for the question. What energies did your ancestors or ancestral ancestors use after they departed from the rocket motors or rocket drives? I must ask, what kind of energies and engines did they use? Are you allowed to give any information at all?
If I answer your last question first, Then the answer is yes, because here too there is no longer a secret on Earth, because we have been providing relevant scientists with corresponding impulses for quite some time. The answer to the questions of energies and engines is this: electron drives or electron pulse drives. The entire universal space is piled up through and through with electrons. So the space is not simply empty, as the layperson mistakenly thinks, but what is also known to earthly scientists for a very long time. However, electrons do not only exist in one kind or form, but in very diverse forms. However, I am not yet allowed to give further information or explain details about this, nor with regard to the 280 universally existing elements, of which only about 100 are known to Earth scientists. To answer your question, however, I would like to explain to you that our ancestors discovered the principle of electron energy, which is present on all planets and stars as well as in all forms of life, as well as in inexhaustible form in the entire universe. We make use of these electron energies even today, just as our early and later ancestors did, only that we make energy transformations and are incomparably advanced in the use of these energies and their application, as well as in the technology required for them, than our ancestors were. Tachyon drives as well as ray drives and antimatter drives. And our newest means of transportation with transmitters are based on electron energy, which we have been using for many millennia in ever more perfected form. Also, the cosmic electromagnetic life energy, from which any form of life lives, is a product of the never-exhaustible electron energy of the universe. Also, any form of existence, no matter what kind, lives from it, even the spirit forms, even if their energy is infinitely finer.
Are electrons also swinging waves?
That is right.
Aha! Then an electron impulse engine should actually operate in such a manner that it finds a hold on the electrons in free space itself, at which it can repel itself and move by its own swinging waves. A perfect perpetual motion machine, so to speak, if one knows the technology and is able to apply it. This also explains why your spacecraft never lack energy, neither in free space nor on a planet. Also, it dawns on me slowly that you can regulate and apply the redirection of light to make your flying machines invisible, but probably also the phenomenon that you can also fly in an air envelope with unlimited speed without being fried by a friction heat. Because if you protect your ships or other flying bodies with electron swinging waves, with an electron swinging wave mantle, so to speak, then the slightest friction can no longer arise. Is that so, or am I right?
You amaze me as always. You should have become a space technician, my friend. Once again, you made me ask you a question to give you a small statement with which you could continue working at lightning speed and give facts that I did not actually want to mention.
But you should have thought of that, my friend, because with the word electron energy and with the word electron swinging waves, some spotlights came up in a flash, which illuminated certain dark caves and abysses within me. And if I now continue to think about it, then some spotlights will come up again, which will illuminate other dark points for me, such as the fact that on Earth, electron power plants would have to be built instead of lousy nuclear power plants, and that medical scientists would also have to get behind the problem of electron medicine. Because through certain electronic influences, etc., not only any disease will be cured, but life can also be prolonged for centuries. Together with the Salubritation, it should be possible to reach the same Methuselah age as you. Apart from that, these energies would also be able to cope with the enormous environmental pollution. Because then, no more diesel and petrol coaches would pollute the earthly atmosphere. Because electron drive vehicles on land and air would become a matter of course. If Earth scientists are clever enough to really fathom this inexhaustible source of energy and make it usable for humans, then all the problems of pollution would be solved. All kinds of factories and productions would be operated and carried out only by the application of electron energy. And even necessary insecticides and herbicides, etc., could be replaced by means of electron energetic form, etc., and so on.
You are unbelievable because you say everything that is customary in our country.
So it could soon be on the Earth. At least the biggest evils could soon be fixed, if our scientists are able to trace them. Also, many useful innovations for the overall well-being of the planet and for all life forms could be created in a short time. Moreover, electrons are practically inexhaustible and present everywhere and in everything and everyone in innumerable form. And if these are made usable by the Earth human, then also the dark period of the technical abuse and the false teachings of religions and sects should be over. But unfortunately, this will still take some time, because according to your statements, this will still last for almost 800 years, before it will be so far along that reason and true progress into the better future begins.
The indicated time is measured by the time when the human beings of the Earth continue in the same style as before. If a positive change in appropriate form and strength occurs, then this time is naturally shortened, perhaps even by several hundred years, which is questionable.
It would really be desirable that the Earth's twits would finally become a little more sensible, also in terms of energy production. With today's technology, it should soon be possible to use electrons as energy sources, right?
This should indeed soon be possible if the scientists make a decisive effort in this direction.
Then they should do it, these arrogant twerps, so that one of the worst earthly evils can finally be resolved.
It would be very useful if they would make an effort.
I have been asked on several occasions whether you also have the evil that your eyes get worse with increasing age, or that you have eye diseases that impair the quality of vision.
Fortunately, we have not known these evils for thousands of years.
Fine, then you will not have any glasses or contact lenses anymore. Did you ever need them?
Of course, but we have not needed them for a very long time. Because for thousands of years we have not had any eye diseases or deformities due to signs of aging, which does not just apply to the eyes, but to all organs of the body and to the entire body.
And how did you hold it then with glasses and contact lenses?
Eyeglasses were common among our peoples for a very long time, but we refrained from using contact lenses at a very early stage, because it was recognized that they were very harmful to the eye and especially to the cornea. Not only were such contact lenses breeding grounds for inflammation-promoting bacteria, but the fact that corneal inflammation and clouding, as well as cataracts in the longer term, were caused, discouraged us from using contact lenses at an early stage. For this reason, fluid preparations were developed to replace such contact lenses before the way was finally found to preserve the eyes of humans through a healthy lifestyle and preventive measures as good as a 100% in their vision.
Then you have overcome these evils. But say, do you have any idea about the traffic here on Earth?
Certainly we are also concerned with that. What do you want to know about that?
Because of the light on vehicles. For some years now, it has been becoming more and more apparent that the lights on motorcycles and cars are switched on during the day. So during the day, the lights are switched on.
This very dangerous evil is known to us, but apparently not to those on the Earth who are responsible for it.
Why dangerous evil?
The headlamp light on vehicles during the day causes a lot of fatal accidents, and of course the fatally injured can no longer explain why they suffered the accident. The main reasons for all fatal traffic accidents of this kind are that, on the one hand, the fatally injured are blinded by the headlights of oncoming vehicles, and many others are blinded by the rear-view mirrors of vehicles behind them in such a way that they lose control of their vehicles. Other fatal consequences include the fact that the lit headlight on vehicles during daylight prevents accurate distance estimation, which very often results in misjudgments of distance, leading to many fatal accidents.
And, of course, the dead can no longer tell us that their fatal accident was caused by the damn headlight of following or oncoming vehicles. And I have been finding out for years that this is actually the case. Headlamp lighting on road vehicles during daylight hours is really just as great an idiocy as traffic calming in Switzerland, which unnecessarily terrorizes road vehicle users by narrowing roads, creating roundabouts, and creating traffic obstacles.
We are also aware of this foolish evil of unthinking wannabe traffic experts. Furthermore, I know that you and Ava have very often only escaped the most serious accidents with luck and the greatest attention. When you have been put in danger by the irresponsibility.
But the idiots of traffic experts cannot be treated with logic.
Unfortunately, your words are true.
Probably these idiots cannot be instructed. But now I would have something completely different. Near Naples there is a church dedicated to the holy patron Saint San Gennaro, who died about 1,400 years ago. Since then there has been a flask in which there is allegedly blood of the saint, and which is said to liquefy 2 or 3 times a year. Although it is perfectly clear to me that this could actually be brought about if a certain power were to be generated, which could be brought about by a single person, or if a huge crowd of fanatical believers, as could be the case, for example, with San Gennaro, if many thousands of human beings make the pilgrimage to his church, to then ask frenetically and fanatically for the blood to be liquefied. It does not make sense to me that in this case, this should correspond to the facts. Even if Roman Italian Catholicism is extremely conservative and fanatical, the fanaticism of the faithful should not be sufficient to achieve such a blood liquefaction. I do not want to deny that there is actually human blood in the flask, but it is certainly not that of Saint San Gennaro. Rather, I assume that there is alchemist's blood in the bottle mixed with some alchemy substances that liquefy automatically when the bottle is shaken for some time. That is the conclusion I came to when I recently looked at it more closely because I was asked about this alleged blood liquefaction miracle. I used to think that blood liquefaction might really be triggered by the fanaticism of believers, but since I tried to get to the bottom of the truth, I have become more and more familiar with the idea that everything is just a very well and cleverly raised fake alchemy, as Johannes Fausti, Saint Germain, and Magister Crowley and consorts have conjured up.
For this, it is probably not necessary to make further explanations, because as usual you have fathomed the truth so deeply that a comment on it is in no wise necessary. What you have fathomed corresponds to the full and given facts. The whole thing about the miracle of blood of Saint San Gennaro corresponds to an alchemical charlatanry that came about through the order of Pope Boniface IX in 1389, who held his office until 1404.
I thought the same thing.
It would be incomprehensible to me if it were different. But now I should speak again of those things that are to be said from my side. It should be a matter of concern to you and the group to make public once again that there is still not enough being done about CFCs and other ozone-depleting substances and chemicals, etc., to avert the imminent danger. The governments and other responsible persons are still much too lax to really contain and prevent the imminent catastrophe. Huge amounts of ozone-depleting matter and substances, gases and dirt are still thrown into the atmosphere, where the ozone layer that protects life is being destroyed more and more. For this year alone, it is to be feared that the density of the ozone layer will be reduced by about 26.8%, whereby many lives will be eminently more endangered from a health point of view, whereby black cancer will increasingly appear, especially in humans. The size of the South Pole hole in the ozone layer will also increase enormously, and by the end of the year will have reached 23.2 million square kilometers. However, even above the North Pole, the danger of ozone holes is rapidly increasing, which should make all those responsible on the Earth more thoughtful and bring faster action. Only radical measures can help and prevent the catastrophe.
We will do our best to make this known, and to warn the human beings of the Earth.
How do you intend to do this?
In the form that we publish a special issue, WZ, Figu periodical publication, Stimme der Wassermannzeit, or otherwise a booklet with your corresponding explanations.
451. This should be the right way. But your efforts should then also be directed towards ensuring that the writing reaches all the necessary governments. As far as governments are, actually it concerns the government in Russia, which is headed by Mikhail Gorbachev. In the early morning of the 19th of August this year, he is to be overthrown by an extremely extreme conservative coup committee.
That cannot be true, because that would destroy all that Gorby built up over many years and risked his life for. Such madness could mean that the terror of many dictatorships could once again be brought to bear throughout the world.
It will not be that bad if one disregards the danger of madness in Iraq, which is still looming for a long time, namely that of Saddam Hussein, who will remain a worldwide threat for as long as he lives. This will soon prove itself in the coming summer and autumn, when his real machinations with regard to atomic bomb production, new attack plans on Kuwait and the Kurds, as well as the earlier plan of supercannons and even the plans for the production of hydrogen bombs become known.
You mean that Saddam Hussein is working on another war and rearming himself again, so to speak, under the eyes of the blind Americans and the equally blind Security Council?
Certainly. As you say, but also far too soft and unstable to take the necessary hard measures against Saddam Hussein to finally eliminate him and render him harmless in any appropriate and accountable form. The Security Council, however, has also succumbed to a false and lenient erroneous humanism, as have virtually all the governments and courts of the world, whereby the evil of crime and violence can become more and more prevalent both criminally and politically. Only a hard, just, and relentless crackdown can help before a catastrophe happens. A multinational peacekeeping force in Henok's sense would be the solution, but you know better than I do. Saddam Hussein is a beast and knows no pardon at all. He will once again war the Kurds, and so he will oppose the regulations of the Security Council and the provisions of the Atomic Commission.
Those are quick prospects. But you can talk about that later. Better explain to me what will happen in Russia about Gorby. You said that everything would not be so bad, but nevertheless I suddenly worry.
Which you can dismiss, because the overthrow will fail after only 3 days. The power-hungry man who calls himself Boris Yeltsin will bear the real blame for the whole debacle. Openly and underground, he will rush against Mikhail Gorbachev and his Yeltsin's dirty, deceitful, and only for unlimited power heinous machinations will lead. If the people's trust in Mikhail Gorbachev has been weakened by him, to the putschists being able to take action and Gorbachev being imprisoned in Crimea when he goes on holiday. In contrast to the fact that Boris Yeltsin acts out of the purest personal greed for power and wants to destroy Mikhail Gorbachev in his office, the putschists will be influenced by tremendous religious sectarian forces, which for some time now have been infecting all those worldwide who are either power-hungry or unstable, or who are walking along the paths of, or fighting for the truth, and in the sense of creational truth and the teaching of the Spirit, also known as creation energy teaching. The prelude to this was the attack on you when you were struck by the controlled energy flash. These religious sectarian forces are of an enormous nature and infect anything and everything that does not pulsate in their untruthful, erroneous, destructive, and truth-denying direction. This means, however, that you are once again exposed to the greatest dangers and that you will once again be sought for life, which will require you to divide the night watches in the center between two persons who will exercise them together. Otherwise, however, I must insist that these religious sectarian powers will not weaken again, but that in the future they will continuously strengthen themselves, and now will also assail all and any group members in order to dissuade and mislead them from their knowledge and from their cognition, whereby they will fall away from the mission and thus from the teaching of the truth, and from the truth in general. Not a single member of the group will be immune to this, because not everyone yet lives in complete knowledge of the truth, and thus not in the necessary conviction of the truth. For this reason, they are all still fragile and exposed to the danger of an attack that can arouse doubt and rebellion and even conflict between truth and false doctrines in them. Not a single group member is immune to it, which is why everyone can be attacked and could suddenly stand up against the truth and against the mission. Increasingly, and in much stronger forms than before, it is therefore necessary and imperative for the individual group members to devote themselves to the truth and the mission in order to build up the necessary strength within themselves and to resist, as a necessary unity and strong group, all evil, religious, sectarian, and truth-destroying attacks, and to put a stop to the lies and destruction in matters of truth annihilation.
That is indeed bad news.
Certainly, but only those prophecies begin to be fulfilled that have been written for 2 millennia.
Your words refer to the prophecy that says, "Then many will succumb to the temptation, and they will betray and hate one another because they remain small in consciousness."
My speech is of that and of that which is recorded as a prophecy in the Talmud Emmanuel. Very many will not resist the hostility and will succumb to it, so they fall away from the truth and begin to work against it. Especially within the internal area of the group, the forces of the hostility will become very great and will throw certain group members into doubt and dissension. But even outside of the groups, the religious and sectarian forces are sabotaging all those who want to seek after the actual, creational, and original eternal truth and live accordingly. However, felonious and criminal, negative elements are also attacked in order to sow by this murder and mayhem, discord, revolution, enslavement, terror, hatred, and many other malicious, negative values. It will also be so with the rebels in Moscow, who will be influenced by these murderous and truth-hostile forces to overthrow Mikhail Gorbachev, which they Thus, he will continue his positive reforms, even against all adversities that are placed in his way, whereby in particular the power-hungry Boris Yeltsin will become a talking point in terms of hostility against Gorbachev. But unfortunately, many are not as strong in their truth conviction and in their actions as Mikhail Gorbachev, which is why many fall to the hostility of the sectarian forces, either in the way that they fall into doubt and dissension, or as this becomes more and more prominent, the more that the time approaches the point when the power of the worthless number, 666, openly manifests, namely in the sense of the murderous, criminal, and destructive power of sectarian Christianity, which in many respects holds the lethal value of 666 in itself, as you know very well. The anti-logos will become more and more apparent, from which also group members will not remain spared, but also many outside of the groups, who strive for the real creational truth and for the observance of the creational laws and recommendations. In the future, all of these will increasingly and often very strongly be endangered in life and limb and in consciousness. Accidents of all kinds and also diseases, discord and strife, denial, dissension and doubt, hatred and betrayal, as well as quite sudden, unexpected, and inexplicable mood changes, as well as emotional and feeling-related outbursts of evil kinds, will appear more and more and will threaten the peace and the truth. So it already began more than a year ago, and even worse, it will develop itself in the coming and future time. Through this, not only will you be increasingly endangered in your life again, but also certain group members are now included therein.
Do you mean that assassination attempts could be launched again?
That is the meaning of my words. At the same time, this not only applies to certain group members of the Center, but also to group members who exist elsewhere all around the Earth in other groups. In addition, attacks on the lives of individual group members can occur in any conceivable form, such as during the use of all kinds of vehicles, during the use of aircraft, while at work, or otherwise, during any activity and other doing. The possibilities of an attack on life and limb as well as on consciousness are limitless.
Steady, attentive vigilance is thus the maxim for the future.
That corresponds to the circumstances.
Then that is also clear. Another question concerning Pope Bonifacius IX. Why did the guy order the blood miracle at that time, and who brewed the necessary sauce for it? Was the guy trying to hold his believers in line?
The reason for this was actually the fact that with the fraudulent charlatanry, the then quite fickle believers were to be bound to the church and its criminal delusion cult, which had also succeeded excellently and still succeeds today. The man commissioned by the Pope was an inconspicuous citizen by the name of Claudio, who dealt with alchemy and who was deeply indebted to Pope Boniface IX.
Thank you for the information. Do you not think that now, after you have mentioned the concerns about the religious sectarian attacks on the truth-seekers and complacent ones, they will, at every opportunity, shift their self-responsibility onto these destructive powers when they do negative things and lash out? By which I mean that the attacked will, in future, always seek the blame only from these evil powers and deny self-responsibility.
Certainly, all those who are dishonest and who do not want to stand by the truth will try to do this. Truthfully, however, the aggressors cannot claim the excuse that the sectarian power influences are to blame for all their failures, and misbehavior as well as Ausartungen, their having gotten very badly out of the control of their good human nature, for if negative things appear, then the direct blame for it always lies with the person himself or herself who truthfully causes the negative things and does not defend themselves sufficiently against the evil influences.
Exactly, because that is exactly the law. Then everything would have been said in this respect, or is something still unsaid?
Maybe I should say a few words about that. Already since time immemorial, since malicious cult powers and religious sectarian powers came into existence, the truth-seekers and truth-lovers were attacked and often driven to insanity or misery and death by these, just as much as were the might-greedy delinquents and criminals who pay homage to the evil and negative ones. Also, all the prophets who wandered the earth again and again since the earliest times did not remain spared from that. All of them, no matter whether man or woman, always resist these evil powers and attacks, which unfortunately cannot be said of those who emerged as simple believers or as the heads and preachers, or religion founders and so forth, who have appeared and are still appearing and will continue to appear. With the earth humans, predominating quite especially, is the erroneous and dangerous view that a good announcer of truth, a good preacher or a good teacher of the true teachings, and so forth, and therefore also a good prophet, must be full of humble bearing, only speak loving and gentle, chosen and diplomatic words, and must always only be friendly. The earth humans think it must be just the same as how, for example, the Pope comports himself, and therefore many gentlemen ministers and sect leaders, who truthfully, however, do nothing other than hide their true faces and appear friendly and neighbor-loving, to thereby mislead their believers about their actual nature and to be able to exploit them. It is exactly such religious, or often only apparently religious, elements who are then the quite especially valuable objects of attack of the sectarian powers, and who then commit the most monstrous inhumanities and crimes, as is, however, also characteristic of all believers when it concerns their own profit and has to do with their own lives. But truthful and good prophets and bringers of truth are never humble and never compliant with enticements and such things. Neither their speech nor their demeanor is ingratiating, and their style and manner of saying the truth is cutting, deeply striking, and in a form that is not loved. With that, it is truthfully recognized whose child of the Spirit a prophet or truth announcer of whichever kind, or an actual truth-bearing teacher is. Religious sectarians, fanatics, extremists, or other proscribers of truth avoid true prophets or other truth announcers, or they try to annihilate, to damage, or even to kill them with all existing means available to them. The only well-meaning ones for the prophets and other truth teachers and truth announcers, since time immemorial, have been only those human beings who are openly devoted to the truth and thankful for the delivered teaching of the truth. It is also only these ones who recognize, in the true prophets, the endless universal love for all forms of life, as well as the righteousness that they exercise, even when, here and there, they themselves are perhaps rebuked and instructed in a hard manner by the prophets and other truth announcers.
You embarrass me, my friend.
That was not my intention. Rather be pleased about that, because you are a true prophet, and allow the love and respect of your worldwide group members to be assured. This also applies to the love and thanks of the entire Druan population who joined our federation a few days ago. This is only your merit.
Druan population? Are you talking about the Druans, who on the 8th of April 1983 gave us the great spectacle with their spaceship, which we could observe in the eastern direction in the evening sky? You are talking about the same Druans who reside on the planet Druan of the System Null, in a galaxy that is about 1.7 times larger than our Milky Way, and that is more than 300 million light-years away? Is your speech really about this?
That is what I am talking about, my friend. You seem to be very happily surprised. You may be too, because I still have special and very dear greetings from Sana, who loves the vastness, Ektol, who rules things, Lumia, the Grand Master, and Ters, guardian of the Word.
Man, you drive me crazy. Of course, I also greet them warmly. But why are you talking about it now? I thought that this had to remain secret.
That time is over, and we can talk about it openly now. I am actually surprised that no one of the group members ever asked you about it, even though it was known that the Druans would visit you in the course of the next 6 months after you had seen them. And they visited you, Sana, Ektol, Lumia, and Ters.
But I was instructed by you and by the Druans to remain silent about it. On the other hand, I had to enlighten them in the teaching of the Spirit regarding certain things, which led to the fact that I also had to mention your mission, and also your federation.
Of course you had to keep quiet about it, that is right. But your explanations led the Druans to get in touch with our federation and to ask for admission to it. After years of efforts and negotiations, etc., this wish was fulfilled. The alliance took place 4 days ago.
Ta, my friend, this is news, which makes me very happy.
I would not have been able to bring you this news without your determinative contribution. But I am not surprised about that, because already Nakadimian and Enoch were geniuses in concerns of such bonds as I have found out through the High Council.
But now enough, otherwise things will arise again, which I would be less pleased about. May I put a question?
Of course.
Good. Is that the truth that during the Second World War, the English almost caused a huge catastrophe that destroyed large parts of Italy and caused climatic changes in Europe?
If you mean the madness of the English Air Force bombing the crater center of the volcano Vesuvius to create an eruption and thus an eruption to damage the German Wehrmacht, then that is true. Fortunately, however, only a small eruption occurred as a result of the massive bombardment, which did not cause any further damage. However, it could have been that the English had succeeded in their plan, which would have led to a catastrophe. A forced big eruption of the volcano by bomb force could have had much worse consequences than that huge eruption. When Pompeii was completely buried and destroyed on the 24th of August of the year 79 AD. By certain circumstances prevailing at that time, not only a part of Italy would have been destroyed, and Europe would have been thrown into a climate catastrophe, but it could have fulfilled itself for the Earth the same fate. As once with the planet Malona, which was brought by senseless human machinations to the explosion and circles since then as the asteroid belt around the sun.
My question referred to this madness, yes. But what would have been the reason why the Earth exploded instead of just one huge volcanic eruption?
An enormous inner rupture, which reaches very deep into the inner layers of the Earth, would have gapped apart and would have swallowed up all the waters of the Mediterranean and some of the Atlantic if Vesuvius had begun to erupt with great force. The penetrating waters would have plunged deep into the Earth's interior and there instantly evaporated by the seething magmas, which would have created such an overpressure that it could no longer have escaped through the throat of Vesuvius. Also, the fact that the enormous overpressure would have blown up and torn a direct connection to the two other Italian volcanoes, Stromboli and Etna, and would have released some overpressure through their chimneys, would have been, so to speak, only a drop on a hot stone. The three volcanoes, which are also normally connected but not very decisively, would have allowed less than 6% of the explosive vapor masses to escape. The further consequence would have been that the unimaginable forces of the not-released overpressure would have been compressed in such a way that they would have finally caused the Earth to explode and rip into pieces.
Idiots.
This designation does not even in the least form say what enormous crime the English would have committed against the whole of humankind.
Even the Americans were not much better, and they still are not much better. Behind the Nazi regime and behind Stalin, they certainly do not stand back when it comes to crime and inhumanity. Despite their...
Unfortunately, only too true are your words. Even during the Gulf War, there were such enormous inhumanities, which were especially caused by the Americans.
So what inhuman things have they done there? But how could it be otherwise than that they are constantly committing war crimes, as was the case in the last World War and in Vietnam? The Americans are no better than the Nazis were, even if it must be conceded that their intervention alone, together with their allies, prevented the worst in terms of war escalation with regard to Saddam Hussein's insane ideas and crimes.
The inhumane actions of the American Army in the Gulf War buried more than 3 times 10,000 living. Bodies of the men of the Iraqi army in the trenches and tank ditches, because the Americans simply covered the trenches and holes with big, earth-moving machines.
Which, of course, the Americans are never called to account for, as was not the case in the Second World War and Vietnam, nor in America itself, where entire regions were contaminated by nuclear energy, such as in New Mexico, Utah, and Nevada, where thousands of human beings, mostly Americans, were contaminated by radioactive radiation and died miserably as a result, such as many showmen, such as John Wayne and Jules Briner and many others. Underground and above-ground atomic bomb tests were to blame for it, whereby the responsible persons did not warn fully consciously the humans who lived in those areas or worked there later, whereby these were contaminated literally to tens of thousands. The landscape there also looks damaged and destroyed when I think of the places where the underground atomic bomb tests take place.
Which you know from your own experience and observation, when Quetzal took you several times to those places where you could also experience at close range when the atomic bomb tests were made.
I will never forget that. What I witnessed from very close up gave me the impression that the earth was rearing up and screaming in a heavy, deep and painful breath, only to collapse into itself murdered and remain lying shamefully. I saw and felt the tremendous vibrations that not only peeled up the earth, but also vibrated high into the sky, hitting our ship and hurling it away, hovering less than 300 meters above the scene. At first, the earth's upsweeping looked like a flat bubble, but then it collapsed, circularly, and circle by circle, so to speak, to form a large crater. It was just terrible, and somehow it seemed to me as if I heard and felt the screaming and the tremendous pain of the earth. I was indeed shaken, and if I had been able to, I would have brought those responsible for these crimes on Earth to account.
I can understand you only too well, and I also know your reactions to these events very well, because Quetzal registered them with his analysis equipment so I could see everything. I know how terrible everything was for you. But the same is true for ourselves as well. A fact which, unfortunately, cannot yet be grasped and understood by Earth humans, because their senses and aspirations and their sensitivity are not yet so sensitized that they are able to feel with the Earth, as is the case with you and us.
Unfortunately, you are right, my friend. But one more question concerning the alleged blood miracle. Are you informed about whose blood is actually in the bottle that is supposed to contain the blood of San Gennaro? Because apparently my assumption is correct, that there is actually human blood inside, but mixed with certain substances that lead to liquidation when shaken.
Certainly it contains human blood, but only in small amounts, which can be proven by scientists at any time. But this is mixed with chemical substances, as I mentioned before. The blood does not come from San Gennaro, but from the wife of the alchemist Claudio.
Well, thank you. Then I have a question about the religious sectarian forces that have been acting very negatively and malignantly on certain human beings and groups of human beings for quite some time, as you said. In my opinion, one can also defend oneself against them in the form that, for example, Salome Gamnan is spoken in a repetitive form. The main form of defense, however, is a personal truthfulness and adherence to it. Also, the common standing true and holding together might be a decisive help for the defense of this destruction-demanding sectarian forces, as well as self-confidence and self-developed knowledge and self-developed conviction out of knowledge of truth, that only the truth of the creative doctrine of the Spirit is the real and truthful truth, and that only this can be followed.
You are much more knowledgeable and well-versed in these matters than I am. But also, in my opinion, it cannot be otherwise than you explain. A recognition of the truth and a standing together of the group members becomes now particularly important. The group must now really become the core in every relationship. But now let me tell you about other things that are important or simply important to mention. About the rising riots in Yugoslavia and about the forthcoming civil war in Croatia, together with the Serbs, etc. should not be said much, actually, because Yugoslavia is a forced state, which united several countries in itself to a so-called multi-ethnic state, or tried to unite, which, however, never was or could become a multi-ethnic state. The peoples of Yugoslavia are not actually such, but have been gigantic tribes since time immemorial who were never willing to fit into a just order. On the whole, they are made up of war-addicted elements, which must be called small, primitive, and crazy wannabe Rambos, if today's common language of terrestrial humans is used. You will see and experience that this corresponds to the truth, because it will be the case that the World Security Council and various states constantly intervene against the acts of war, and that many times armistice agreements are proclaimed, which, however, are in no wise adhered to and not fulfilled, because the participants prefer to promote acts of war rather than peace. However, we should not lose any further words about this, because any reasonable admonition to these foolish war addicts would be pointless. These warring criminal elements will only be able to stop their bloody and selfish fights after a long time of unspeakable damage and cruel suffering and by many deaths, without having become more clever through what has happened.
Then it might also be unnecessary to collect large newspaper clippings to document your predictions in this contact report, right?
You can save yourself this effort because it does not pay off. A small documentation should be enough to support my statements. Let us not talk about it any more, but let us turn to other things, which will surely interest the human beings more, for example, the political development in the Soviet Union. Many of the Soviet republics will oppose the KGB government and seek their own autonomy, whereby many republics renounce the Union and become independent. But unfortunately, this will be connected with war and great terror and will carry itself far into the third millennium, through which much human blood will flow and need, misery, suffering, and grief will come over the peoples concerned.
Then the Soviet Union will slowly but surely disintegrate, as will the central government, so that the Communist alliance will soon no longer exist.
That is right.
Well, then this will provoke a tremendous change throughout the world. So let the time come and everything happen, then we will experience it. So we can deal with more banal things like the weather. How will the winter announce itself after the wonderful warm summer, which will make me happy once again, if it actually becomes as beautiful as you said and explained? Will it be as splendid as it was in 1947? It was just as warm or hot as the century had been for years, 47 degrees warmth. I can still remember very well that various apple trees blossomed twice and bore fruit in this year 1947, some of which even ripened, even though it had not rained for more than 5 months. Only at the end of September, the first autumn thunderstorms came, which raged in such a manner that the sky seemed to burn. Power lines ignited to hundreds of meters and hailstorms pelted down, which beat whole forests into shreds with fist-sized missiles.
I also remember this very well, for at that time I was on the earth for a long time. You have a phenomenal memory, my friend. Everything really happened as you said. This summer will not be as hot as it was in 1947, but there will be day temperatures of 38 to 40 degrees. Also, the beginning of winter will not be so bad, but it will announce itself in different areas already on the 20th of September and cause early snowfalls as well as landslides. This will not only be the case in Switzerland, but worldwide. Also, huge forest fires of immense dimensions will appear this year, as for example in the jungles of Sumatra and Borneo, which will be so immense that the cities will be affected by smoke, haze, and gas, etc.
These jungles are rainforests, are they not?
That is right. Unfortunately, there will be many deaths as well, as will be the case with recent battles in Afghanistan.
The crazy ones there do not give up yet.
Unfortunately, no. Turkey, too, will once again fight against the Kurds, just like Saddam Hussein.
One more question about Yugoslavia. Is there not something similar being done as in Iraq, that multinational troops intervene?
It will be spoken of, certainly. But the same will probably not happen as in Iraq. The responsible persons of the authoritative states have not yet grown so far in their responsibility that they would actually undertake such an action in Iraq as also in Yugoslavia. It will only be talked about for the time being, in quite a grandiose form.
And in reference to a multinational peacekeeping force according to Enoch's model, nothing is happening in the bosom of reason yet?
Not directly. No, because still the responsible persons of all authoritative governments have not become so much more clever and not more responsible that they would grasp and rethink such a thought for the creation of a multinational peace battle force in Enoch's sense. They are still all trapped in false and effeminate and illegal humanism, which brings more decline than progress.
That will probably not be changeable for a long time, unfortunately. So let us leave that alone, if you can speak again of those things that will arise in the future. So please go on.
The next thing will happen in the Ötztal Mountains, on the Similon Glacier. There, the mummified remains, or more precisely the mummified corpse of a man, will be found who has lost his life there 105 years ago and was preserved by nature's forces. His death happened at that time in such a manner that he fell.
Nope, ICF. Not just from standing to the ground, but some distance down.
Caused by an epileptic fit, and was severely injured by one of his own arrows when he fell on his back just at the moment when a primeval ice storm started. As a member of a group of 14 persons who had camped there in the mountains, he was left laying on the ground because of his critical injury. Since the remaining 13 human beings were fully occupied with saving their own lives, they did not care for him. Nevertheless, not all of them survived, as several of them died in the ice needle storm. The storm covered the mountains under a thick layer of ice, and in it the corpse of one who fell remained mummified and preserved until today. So had he. The corpse will be found this year around the 20th of September by a mountain hiker, together with his equipment, like clothes and weapons, etc.
Fantastic. Do you also know what the man and his comrades wanted to do on the mountain, and who the man was, and where he came from?
Certainly I can give you precise information. His name was Urk, and he belonged to the clan of the Suren plural, to a tribal community which lived on pile dwellings. This was in Switzerland and before the time when the Vikings were settling in central Switzerland and the other parts of Switzerland. The pile dwellings of the tribal community of the Suren were located on the banks of Lake Zurich, from where they took long expeditions which led them to the Mediterranean Sea and to the North Sea, to the Atlantic Ocean, and even to the Bosporus. At his death, Urk was exactly 37 years and 8 months old, and to be exact, 17 days. The reason why he and his group was so far away from home in the Ötztal Mountains was that he, as the chief of his clan and as an influential man, was in connection with our forebearers. Through them he gained certain knowledge and lived, just as all members of his entire clan, according to certain rules of our making. Thus, they obeyed the hygienic rules which had been put up by us at much earlier times, which also related to the removal of unhygienic body hair growth. After having been informed by our forebears about the vastness of the countries in the east, many of the clan of the Suren felt an urge for the east. That is why they set off under the guidance of their tribal chief Urk to discover the faraway countries and to find valuable material, like crystals and ore in accordance with that time, and flints and all kinds of other things.
You could say then that this Urk was an original Swiss, so to say, whereby his mummified body would be brought to Switzerland. Research will surely be done on him, which then would righteously be the task of the Swiss scientists, would it not?
If looked at it from a legal angle, it would have to be so, that is right. However, neither the Austrians nor the Italians will be drawn into this, and they will mutually claim the right on the mummified body because there will be border disputes regarding the location where the corpse will be found. Of course, they would not pay any attention to my words and would call you a charlatan, cheat, and liar, who would have purely invented my explanations if you or someone else would make some claim on the mummy in the name of Switzerland.
That is clear to me. But why, I ask myself, were your forebearers in contact with this Urk, and of what kind were they?
The contact resulted from an unwanted stroke of fate when a flying device of our forebearers had an accident. Urk observed the emergency landing of the device and saved the life of 2 crew members when they, while exploring the surroundings, were attacked by a big bear and were severely injured, without having any chance to defend themselves in the first place. From this happening resulted a deep friendship between Urk and the 2 space travelers, and so human beings of a still very primitive kind and very advanced form formed a very uncommon alliance. Urk, who was naturally gifted, and contrary to his clan comrades, very understanding and knowing to a good extent, learned fast and became the leader of his clan within less than 3 years. According to the standards of that time, he was wealthy and influential to a great degree, whereby it was helpful that it was frequently observed that the flying devices were landing or starting, with whose passengers Urk liked to have long talks, and since he was often taken into the flying devices for trips to somewhere.
At what age did he become the chief of the clan? And why did your forebearers not help him in that blizzard?
He was nearly 21 years old when he became the leader of his clan. My answer to your second question is that our forebearers were not present when death came upon him, because they were occupied elsewhere and were absent for more than 18 years. When they returned, Urk was already buried deep beneath the ice, so they let him lay there.
Aha, now the thing becomes understandable to me. But now I would have another question, which refers to something completely different, but which you can certainly answer if you know the history of the SOL system. Recently they approached me with a question that I did not have an answer for either. So do you know the history of the SOL system?
This is one of my many fields of knowledge. Therefore, ask.
Good. It is about the destroyer. The question is whether the traveling planet in the Sol system has caused other things than just those things that Simyase and Quetzal explained to me. Somehow there seem to be other events, which were not talked about, but which must at least be related to the destroyer, or which were directly evoked by the destroyer. This interests me personally on the one hand, but on the other hand, I have also been addressed thereupon. During the conversations with Simyase and Quetzal, there was practically only talk about the fact that Venus was dragged here by the traveling planet and found its current track around the sun, whereby, however, also the Earth was disturbed and was affected by catastrophes, apart from the fact that also at different other places in the SOL system devastating damage, etc. was caused. But what exactly happened? Neither your daughter Simyase nor Quetzal have given more details. For my part, I did not ask for more details either, so that it was not discussed any further. But now it would be very convenient for me if you could give me further information, perhaps also about the planetary relations of our system. Because somewhere beyond the sun, there should be a planet, which should orbit very far outside of all other planetary orbits around our mother star.
That is correct. But this planet can never be observed from the Earth, because it travels very fast around the sun, exactly in the opposite direction to Earth, at a speed so high that the planet keeps pace with Earth, so to speak, and circles around the sun with it in absolute synchrony, so that it never becomes visible from the Earth and thus always remains hidden behind the Sun.
And how big is this little guy, and where is the location or the orbit?
The diameter of the planet is 147.6 kilometers, and the orbit is far outside the Pluto orbit at about 87.5 billion, 87,500,000 kilometers from Sol.
Thank you for the information. But what about the destroyer? Has it done anything else in our system, or rather in the SOL system, other than just the things Sim-Ya-Se and Quetzal were talking about?
Your assumption is correct, because my daughter did not give any information about an event, whereby the events around the entry of Venus into today's orbit were not completely explained. There was already another planet in its current orbit.
You mean that?
Yes, a planet with a diameter of 6,100 kilometers orbited the Sun in today's Venusian orbit.
And what happened to it?
It collided with the destroyer and was thrown from its orbit directly towards the Sun, torn into it and destroyed.
Then it dissolved into gases, so to speak, while Venus then took its or a similar orbit around the Sun and has been orbiting our mother star ever since.
It happened so.
Then the planet was about twice as big as our Earth's moon, or in other words, it was about half as big as the Earth.
You can make these comparisons, yes.
You could also say that it was about 1/7 smaller than Mars.
That is also true.
So, did you have a name for this planet too?
In our records, it is called Skill.
That almost sounds like Skrill. But surely there is no connection to the dimension from which the supposed dimension changers come. Those brutal and bestial Skrills that sometimes attack humans in their greed for sex.
Your assumption is correct, because skill means nothing other than desolation in the sense of the language evaluation handed down to us. The term Skrill means Ausartung, to get very badly out of the good human nature.
Aha! Then they are thus called the Oscartetten.
This is so, but we also call them dimension changers, as you already mentioned. But the term Skrill means ausgeartet only for us, because truthfully the Skrills call themselves Skrill, which means dimension changer in their language.
Without a doubt, these Skrills are human beings, even if they are completely vicious, brutal, and bestial, and incredibly sex-hungry, males as well as females. The horror of these differently dimensioned beings is only that they are completely Osguarded and capable of switching from their dimension to other dimensions, whereby they then attack and rape human beings in the other dimensions. It is a good thing that this does not happen very often, and that human beings of other dimensions, such as our dimension, can only clear and pave the way for these Skrills through psychological misconduct. By this, I mean that these Skrills can only penetrate into other dimensions and work there if other human beings of this dimension clear the way for them by self-destructively driving their psyche to malfunction, and thus psychical collapse. I know all this from Quetzal, who also explained to me that you only know about it because some of your scientists once succeeded in connecting with these Skrills and experiencing their way of life and all the trimmings.
There is no need for further explanation in this regard. You have explained everything necessary. But let me tell you again what will happen in the future. Around the 19th of October, a major earthquake will occur in the far north of India, which will claim many lives, while at about the same time in California, in America, a huge conflagration will destroy forests, fields, parks, houses, and many other buildings, but also many humans will die.
The quake in India? Is it related to the fact that the continental plates under the Himalayas are crashing and bumping again? Or is it due to the fact that everything there is on the fire belt and possibly underground gas chambers explode or something like that?
It will be a tectonic quake, the triggering of which is not the fault of human beings.
So a shifting and overlapping of the continental plates.
That will be the reason.
Understood. But tell me, is Tokyo not also threatened by heavy earthquakes? Because even there the fire belt undermines the country. Quetzal once said something like that. Tokyo is said to be as endangered as San Francisco.
That is also true, but I do not want to give any details about it.
That is fine. But I have a question for that. You said that Saddam Hussein wanted to secretly manufacture all kinds of weapons, not only a giant cannon, but also atom bombs and even hydrogen bombs. But what about the Israelis? They are no better, as Quetzal once told me. They have to be quite further along in this respect, because Quetzal said that they already pose a world threat with their nuclear arsenal. If Quetzal's statements correspond to the facts, which I take absolutely for granted, then the Israelis must have nuclear warheads that can be fired with missiles and artillery. But Quetzal also said that the domineering state leaders of Israel and the Israeli military have many other deadly things at their disposal.
Unfortunately, this corresponds to the evil reality, even if the criminal leaders and their accomplices vehemently deny it and deny the dangerous and world-threatening truth. However, nothing else can be expected from domineering elements like these. Every lie and every crime is always just good enough for them to realize their murderous plans.
Unfortunately, you are not telling me anything new. But when we speak of the Israelis, we have to be careful, because it is not simply the Israelite citizens or simply the Jewish believers who are named, but the state leaders, the extremists, radicals and conservatives, etc., some of whom are grouped together under the name of Zionists and who are active militarily, in the secret service, and are hungry for political might.
Well said, my friend, but we have already talked about this in earlier conversations, and these concerns have been clarified in detail.
Of course, but a repetition certainly does not hurt, especially in this case. But may I ask you another question?
Of course, but your constant questions delay my remarks in relation to upcoming events.
You can talk about that later. My question concerns our Milky Way, and indeed in relation to the age of the lady. On the same point, I also want to know something more in relation to the oldest planetary body that arose from our Milky Way. The Earth itself had the beginning of its origins 646,000 years ago, as the first gases, molecules, and atomic particles and quarks, and so forth, formed, which, in the course of time came together and solidified, flew apart again, newly came together and solidified again, and so on, until finally everything was bound together in such a manner that about 46,000 years ago, the solid body of Earth began to form, which then, about 5,000 years ago, was so hard and solid that slowly life developed on it. First only seas of lava and volcanoes, and then, in the course of time, also the very first and primitive life in the form of lichenoid plant life. That was about 5,000 years ago. At the least, concerning the age of the solid material in the Sol system, everything may just be about 5,000 years old, if one conceives that the youngest matter would only be about 200,000 years old, as Quetzal explained. In regard to that, I am also still able to remember that he said that during the first time that the planetary bodies were solid, and thus the Earth and all planets, which, due to the monstrous volcanism, so to speak, would allow no cosmic rays at all to penetrate onto the still, partly fluid, solid bodies. Consequently, such radiation could only penetrate onto the planets very much later, whereby this later time can be up to 1,000 years, depending on the development of the planet. This, so he explained, led thereto that the radioactive material would exhibit completely different particulars of age than that which would correspond to the actual age of the solid bodies, and so therefore to the planets. Unfortunately, I do not understand much of that.
Your explanations correspond to our knowledge, and actually there is no material of a solid form in the SOL system older than about 5,000 years, which also corresponds to the average age of the planets and their moons. Whereas the youngest coarse matter material is only of an age of not yet fully 200,000 years. Sol moves itself forward in space, with the entire system, in two directions. So on one hand, in the direction of the constellation of Hercules at about 20 kilometers per second, but also, on the other hand, around the entire Milky Way, and indeed with a speed of 257.07 kilometers per second, whereby one rotation of the Milky Way, as the Earth human names the galaxy that he and the SOL system belong to, takes 311,000 years, which is in comparison to the erroneous assumptions of the Earth scientists, who take only about 200,000 years as the starting point, because they measure too small a distance to the center of the galaxy. The age of this galaxy amounts to close to exactly 810,000 years since the beginning of the first formations of gas, whereby I also have answered your question in relation to this. Consequently, only your question still remains to be answered regarding the oldest solid material, respectively, according to the oldest planets in this galaxy, about which I have already thereby answered you as I explained to you that the oldest material in the SOL system indicates an age from around 5,000 years. All further, and the oldest systems of suns or planets in the outer and outermost realms of the galaxy's spiral arms indicate the same age with insignificant differences which, as a rule, do not exceed 500,000 years. The SOL system exists in the outermost realms of a spiral arm and forms, so to speak, an enclave, and therefore the SOL system is one of the oldest systems in the galaxy. In spite of its state of being one of the older solar and planet systems, it is, however, still a young system, in contrast to other systems in the most distant galaxies, because the Milky Way galaxy itself is still very young, with a total age of only 810,000 years. Other further and very much further galaxies are much older, and these naturally also show very much older solid material, because naturally, due to the greater age of the galaxies, their suns and planet systems are also older.
Then the Wanderer, or now the Destroyer, as you have named it, must actually be about 5,000 years old, I mean as a solid body.
Your assumption is correct, at least concerning the age of the destructive wandering planet. However, regarding the designation Destroyer, you have erred with your words, because our earliest forefathers had already given it this name.
Also right. I also want to give your forefathers some respect. Okay, but how old now is the oldest solid material, or indeed coarse matter, in our universe?
Unfortunately, we do not know that.
But then can you at least tell me which age is indicated by any materials, in the form of coarse matter, as is known to you?
That is no secret over which I must remain silent. The oldest solid material known to us is numbered by our scientists with an age of 37,100,000 years, whereby it deals with the material of an iron meteorite, which originated in a very distant galaxy, which is about 2,163,000 light-years away from the Pleiades stars.
You can also say right away that this galaxy, what is it actually called? Is this distance away from the Earth or the Sol system? Because the 500 light-years from the Earth to the Pleiades are no longer significant in this gigantic expanse.
That is naturally correct.
Exactly. Why be so complicated when it also goes simply? 2,763,000 light-years. That is a figure with about, wait a moment, yes, indeed with about 9 zeros, therefore 10 to the power of 9. A quite tidy quantity of light years if one thinks thusly.
Certainly.
You said that the oldest solid coarse matter known to you indicates an age of 37.1 billion 37,100,000 years. Our Dern universe is now just 46,046,000 years old. Even when the smart Earth scientists ignorantly and uncomprehendingly assert that this cannot correspond to the truth, because since the formation of the universe, only 13,013,000 years have passed over the entire course of time. On one hand, I indeed understand their error. On the other hand, however, their narrow-mindedness and megalomania are simply repugnant to me. According to your statement alone, you are in possession of coarse matter material which is already double the age that the Earth scientists assert that the universe is. Already, that testifies to how short-sighted the Earth scientists are, who often only assert things according to erroneous measurements and assumptions over which nonsense one bristles. Indeed, I understand that they can err regarding the age of the matter, because they indeed only have at their disposal material pieces which stem from the realm of our solar system, and which on average are about 4.6 billion 4,600,000 years old, whereby the greatest part of such material consists of stone and iron meteoric material. That the scientists are thereby, however, blinded and let themselves be deceived to megalomania and, from that, draw their wrong conclusions that the universe is just 13,013,000 years old, already borders on narrow-minded stupidity and arrogance. It is completely striking that an unrivaled narrow-mindedness dominates here, even though actually a great many things indicate that the scientific astronomical calculations, data and assumptions, as well as measurements, and so on and so forth, are not correct, or in certain things simply cannot be applicable. Even if the authoritative scientists perhaps really think a lot, they indeed very often think erroneously and in a short-sighted manner. Naturally, that can happen to anyone, so therefore also you and me. But yet I find that human beings, other than even downright narrow-minded scientists, often think more accurately and sooner recognize the reality than even the so-called learned, who are often not more than specialist idiots and, in this characteristic, have a constructed framework in front of their skulls. Indeed, I am also not exactly a luminary regarding astronomy, and so forth, yet I think that at least I am able to think logically, and likewise put two and two together, whereby I can often get to the bottom of things and facts, which appears to be phenomenal to others, although there is nothing phenomenal about it. Thinking logically combining and acting logically, often emerges over long years of study, and brings more than any irritating shop talk about things and matters of which one has only a little knowledge. You see, therefore once again I am struck by something that is, to be sure, only a theory and therefore an assumption from me, but of which I am certain that some of it must correspond to the truth. It therewith deals with the age of the universe, which reaches 46,046,000 years. When, every now and then, I spoke with Simyase, or Quetzal, or with somebody else from you about the age of the universe, then the talk was really always only about the age of the universe, and only since the course of recent time did I come to the salient point that therewith something very essential was forgotten. The universe is indeed comprised of 7 different belts, and indeed the talk about that was always that these 7 belts, namely, together and entirely, form the universe. We only ever spoke of that. It never came to our minds to be more exactly precise in regard to that which we essentially meant and really wanted to know, namely, how old actually the oldest galaxies and their suns and planetary systems are, and which age the materialization belt indicates as it began to form the first denser, and therefore coarse, matter. I want information about that from you, friend Ptah.
First, I must clarify